Constructing your life is about much more than just building a bank account. Each week, join real estate entrepreneur and mindset coach Austin Linney as he interviews guests who are constructing their dream lives and impacting the world around them on a daily basis. If you're an entrepreneur or wanting to start a business, or you just want to hear motivating stories of how others have overcome the odds, you are in the right place. And now for your host, Austin Linney.
Guys, welcome to, it's the Brain Dump. It's not my podcast. This is the Brain Dump. This is me and Anthony's podcast. How you doing, sir?
Were you about to introduce your podcast? Is that what you're going to do?
It's cross-promoting.
Like that.
It's cross-promoting, dude. It's promotion.
I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm gonna have to talk to my agent, see if.
Hey, let me tell you something. I do have a bone to pick with you.
Me?
When you posted about me yesterday, you did not tag me in that post. I do not allow media to be represented.
When did I post?
When did I post?
I don't.
You got all your fancy gifts there. Your new studio and your little thing that you write on. Yeah, he's dialed it.
Yeah.
But enough about this love affair relationship. We got Mr. Steven.
Dysfunctional relationship.
Well, that's what it is. We got Steven in the house. How are you doing, sir?
What's going on, guys? Excited to be here. Excited to dive in.
Yeah, thanks, man. So,
Austin, I met Steven last week in person for the first time.
Okay, I love it.
I physically touched him. He's real. It's not just
in real life.
Yeah, in real life.
I love it. Yeah,
think about that doesn't happen. When was the last time that happened?
You know what somebody said yesterday? What is something that you love to do that's old fashioned? And you know what I said? Hug and shake hands. I'm a wild man. I did. I actually touch people. It's really weird. But every time, I don't know about you, Anthony, but every time me and Steven get together, it's a very intentional conversation about life. And I always love conversing with them. So I'm really interested to hear what we're going to talk about today, Steven.
All right. Well, we're going to be talking about all things success, mindset, life. We're going to go a lot of different directions today, but the end walkway, the outcome is that you guys are going to learn some really important things that are going to make your life better. And the rest is going to be a mystery. So buckle up. Let's dive in.
I love that.
I have a note here, which is for our audience. Before we went live, we don't tell the guests until we sit down with them right before we go live. Hey, you're picking the topic, and Steven goes, "Topic is jugs of water." And that's what I have written here. That's what I truly have written here. And actually, there's something I do want to talk about, which is he said it jokingly, which is success is always having a jug of water at your desk or nearby. And like truly, what I was thinking about is like a lot of success is about preparing yourself, like preparation and taking care of your body and taking care of your environment. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about environment design today and like how we can create a work environment or a life environment, a relationship environment that's conducive to being our best selves.
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal place to start, because at the end of the day, everything comes down to what you're surrounded with, who you're surrounded with, who's in your world, and how you're showing up in it is going to be a direct relation. So yeah, we were talking about having, water available. It's a habit that I've created where I fill multiple jugs of water that are ready to go anytime throughout my house. There's probably 10 jugs of these that are just ready to go, and I'll drink 4 or 5 a day. Staying hydrated is super important. But the underlying point that you're making is this idea of preparing to be ready for whatever it is that you need. Having your food prepped, having the right kind of food in your fridge, making those decisions ahead of time that you're going to go and do your workout or your meditation, or you're going to create these habits. All of those things are where high performance starts. It all starts from the habits, the actions that we take. And really it starts even before that. It starts with the beliefs we have, right? And the mindset. So, obviously I run a show called the Investor Mindset Podcast. If you guys haven't checked it out, definitely click over and listen. If you like today's episode, you'll probably love what we're going to talk about twice a week on that show. But mindset is simply your thoughts and beliefs that end up leading to the actions you take, and therefore the outcomes you experience in your life, right? And so when you can change those thoughts and beliefs, you create a new habit of way of thinking. And those new habits end up really leading to everything that you do. And so I'm curious, you guys, like, how has that made a difference for you in changing some of those thoughts and beliefs towards the preparation or the habits or the things that you're doing that help set you up for success, for living a good life?
I think the most important thing, I use this argument to illustrate something that everybody can relate to. When I get up in the morning, my clothes for the day to work out are already up next to my shoes. And a lot of people, have their clothes in their drawers or behind something else, and they stumbling into getting the day, and they use that as an excuse to not be ready. And so this thing that you say, like, discipline creates freedom, is something that people can't wrap their head around. Mm-hmm. They're like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And I'm like, no, because I've set my day up where I have to take my time in the morning to be something for my clients, for my coworkers. And so you really have to allow yourself frictionless life. And a perfect example, I have a coaching client who wants to lose weight, who wants to get better. He's got a big business he's creating. And I go, how much time are you spending every day thinking about what you're going to cook for lunch? And he's like at least an hour. I'm like, well, then why wouldn't you get Freshly or like have it pre-made? And ever since he's done that, their business has like doubled. And I know it sounds so stupid. It's this little thing, but it's just bandwidth that he can use for something else. I don't know, Anthony, if you see the same thing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think we talk about how willpower is a muscle, which is actually really interesting because the psychology study that found that actually hasn't been replicatable. So willpower as like this finite resource is a little bit of a dubious concept right now in psychology, but I think the framework, the abstract, is very helpful to understand that, like, we do fatigue, we do tire out, and that if we're wasting mental energy spinning our wheels on open cognitive loops that aren't serving us, such as what am I going to wear? Should I go do my workout? Where are my shoes? Like, those things take you away from applying the wheel to the road and getting traction to move you forward. Instead, you're just spinning your wheel. And so it's motion without movement. And for me, like, I always think back when I think about like freedom or the discipline of freedom. I think back to, and I share the story all the time, is growing up, I still have severe ADHD. I was on Ritalin. And when I was 16, I was given the choice of going off that Ritalin. And the Ritalin made me feel trapped. It made me feel trapped to my body and to my mind, and that I had no control over my anything. And so when I was given that choice of going off the drugs, I was like, yes, I want that because freedom is my highest value. But then that was replaced with this new horror, which is the infinite multitude of optionality. When you can do anything that you want, that is overwhelming, and it's very hard to choose which direction to go. And that's where I really struggled for the next decade, was figuring out, like, what do I do with all this potential? And my wheels were constantly spinning, but they were never finding the road. And so when I finally found the road is when I started to apply structure and discipline to my life to create those habits and routines that would say, this is what I want my life to look like. My ideal life looks like this. And that means I have to cut off all the other choices around me, and that's scary. But in doing so, I can live freely, expressing myself towards that life that I've deemed important. And so one of the things I think is interesting about you two cats is every time I look at you, you're in a different place, both of you.
I knew this was going to get up because I was going to ask Steven about this too. Yeah, because Anthony's not that way. So
no, I'm a homebody. I'm always in the same place. So let's talk through that. Like, how do you guys reconcile, creating structure, or habit, or environment design when you're always on the friggin' go?
I think that at the core of it, it's really important to be able to have a little bit of security, and you have to create. I have two different routines. It's the routine while I'm at home, I'm in my own environment. And then I have an adaptable routine, which is I'm on the road, I'm traveling, I'm somewhere else. And as a avid traveler, traveling for events and properties and, checking out different things that are going on in the world, you have to be able to be adaptable. But I think coming back to this idea of the importance of discipline equals freedom, it's a fascinating idea, because I also grew up, was diagnosed ADD when I was very young, was on Ritalin. I chose to get off of it myself. I took myself off when I was in maybe second or third grade, 7 or 8 years old, and then went back on it in college and immediately came back off. And so the thing that I ended up learning from it was that I had to find ways to be able to adapt to not taking the drug, because I felt like it just sucked my personality right out. And there was great things about it, and there was obviously bad things. And so it's interesting because what I've essentially focused on is creating all of these structures in place to leverage that ability into something that's really useful. And it's been, it ends up taking one of your, I think your greatest, or in my case, my greatest weakness, and turned it into one of the things that makes me the best. Because when somebody is hyper focused, you just got to get them focused on the right things, right? And you got to be able to move and adapt. And that obsession that comes along with ADHD can and has been for me something that's really good. Now, also recognizing that is putting the right people in place that can support and help things move forward where otherwise I would choose to not, or drop the ball. So I think that's really big. But the interesting thing about being on the road so much, I'm back in Colorado, in Denver. I'm based out of Denver permanently. Now this is my home. Shortly I'll have the full studio set up here again. But for the last year and some change, almost a year and a half, I've been on the road. And I sold my house in July 2020. I intended on going on a trip for 30 days and coming back and buying a new place and doing another project and creating more equity. And the market kept going up. And frankly, I just took the opportunity to dive into whatever was in front of me. And I went, obviously extended my trip longer in Hawaii, spent some time there. I went back to Minnesota, spent some time with family. And for me, what it really was this place of, I do travel a lot, and that's always been kind of a thing. I've always been building a business that was built to be location independent from day one. And I've sacrificed income in order to make sure that that was possible. And now I've at a place where I don't necessarily need to sacrifice that income to create great business. But it's interesting because the genesis of this was, I'm at the 2-year mark on the house. It's time to sell. I can cash out without paying any taxes on the gain because I did a big renovation and, added a ton of value. But I also had a big life change. I had about a year prior, my younger sister passed away unexpectedly in a car accident. And that last year before that was a year of grief. It was a year of change. It was a year of emotional shutdown for 3 or 4 months and not knowing how to handle those kind of emotions, and then going through a process of coming out the other side. And then when COVID hit, it was actually almost a blessing, because all of a sudden COVID created this cloud cover that I could fly underneath, that all of a sudden everyone else was grieving in a different way. They had their own fears, their own things. And so I was in this, delightful low place, but really making some amazing personal growth work by really focusing in on those feelings. And when that opportunity to go on the road came, I took it. Because I thought, she worked for National Geographic. She traveled the world. She had an amazing life, and it was short. She was 27, but I thought, you know what? I don't know if tomorrow is promised to me, so I better take today. And as a result of doing that, I came back in an even more confident place, in an even more stronger place, with a better understanding of who I am and a better connection to other people as well as myself. And I think that's one of the things that travel can do that's really good, is when you really get to build a good relationship with yourself, but also with others. But also when you go through a tough time like COVID, like the loss of a loved one, like an unexpected loss, right? We all had an unexpected loss with COVID, some of us much worse than others. But it's through that process that you end up really being able to reach deeper into yourself. And now not everyone takes advantage of the opportunity. A lot of people hide from it. They use drugs and alcohol or other things to hide from it. I chose to not go that route. I abstained. It's 2 years since I've had a drink, not because I had a problem. I actually had started a 30-day sober October prior to her death, but it gave me the opportunity to really feel those things. So I lay that out on the table because we went there, and I feel like there's a lot of lessons in there that we could probably unpack that might help some people in their life or business or whatever they're experiencing.
Well, it's funny, similar grief, a lot of different changes last year in March. COVID happened, got laid off 2 days into it, got divorced a week later from a 13-year marriage, started a podcast, kind of same kind of thing. Got in a car to drive to Austin, wound up driving to California, was gone for 45 days, and then proceeded to travel to 18 different states. The road taught me who I was. It grew me up. Like I was like a little, I don't know what I was, but I wasn't fulfilling what I needed to. And being around other people and not really having an agenda and diving into something that I've always wanted my entire life really took some time to myself. My joke about my road trip was I had a passenger. It was me in the passenger seat, and I was going to get to know me. And it was really fun to hang out with him because he's a cool motherfucker, Mm-hmm. And that's what I was telling my mentors and everybody. And, for me to get back to your question, Anthony, I have a road case that is my mobile office that I've cultivated over the year of different products that work. It's in a suitcase. It's got my light. It's got my little computer. It's got my podcast. And so for me, when I have that, it's kind of my pillar, like that I can do my podcast or my coaching on the road because I have those items with me. And then I really, really, really lean hard on my workout routine when I'm on the road because I can hang my hat on that no matter what I'm doing or where I'm at. So that's kind of my genesis to how I handle the road.
Steven, I'm curious, what was your sister's name?
Yeah, her name was Catherine. We call her Cat.
Man, she sounds really cool. Like working for National Geo. That's awesome. Sorry to hear that, man. Mm-hmm. But this is an interesting opportunity to maybe segue the conversation into something that I was thinking about this morning, which is adaptability, which we've mentioned a couple of times here, which ties into the concept of resilience. And I think that was one of the things that I've noticed the most successful people that I've had the fortune of being around is that they are highly, highly resilient. Not just in the small micro moments, but also in the big macro moments. And resilience looks different to everybody, and it takes a different timeline, right? Like sometimes it depends on how hard the hit is. It could take a year, it could take 2 years, 5 years for that resilience to like come back. But I kind of want to segue and talk about what resilience means to you guys, and if that's something that you have noticed as well in others, like successful people, and if you have any tips or tricks or ideas for like how we can develop that or strengthen resilience.
Well, I think resilience comes from experience. There's a great adage that you need to be put through the ringer in order to know how strong you really are. And there's a great example of this. Back in World War II, during the U-boats were shooting down all these British passenger ships, shooting down naval ships. And all these sailors, the ones that were living, they happened to be old, crusty sailors. A lot of the young guys were dying. They were in the water for days or weeks, and they were dying. And in part, what they ended up realizing was they hadn't developed that grit. They hadn't realized the level of where their line really was. And those young guys gave up. And so there was a program that was started called Outward Bound. And the intention of that program was to put men, specifically these sailors, through very tough outdoor expeditions and challenges. And that program has since gone worldwide. You probably have heard of it because sometimes, they'll have adult programs. They'll have kids that are forced to go into it because maybe they're in some kind of trouble. And I personally went through that when I was 18. I chose to go, wasn't in trouble, signed up on my own, spent money we didn't have to go on a 30-day backpacking trip in the South San Juan Mountains of Colorado, 100% off the grid. And as a result of going through that type of challenge where you push yourself 8-10 miles a day, where you don't believe you've got another step in front of you, but you end up finding it, that resilience it's developed, but it's really discovered, because most humans, most people have so much more than they're capable of. And so sometimes it comes down to some really terrible, shitty thing happening. Somebody driving on the road and dying in a car accident, and you realize like, oh shit, life can change in a moment. and you don't expect it to happen to you. You think it only happens to other people, but when it happens, and you either get to accept it or you don't. But at the end of the day, it's here. And so it's by going through and facing those challenges that you actually get stronger. And so I think that's one of the things that I've noticed interviewing and studying high performers is that the faster that they realize and accept things as they are, and maybe see them a little bit better than they are, but they accept them as they are, and they turn into those challenges, as Ryan Holiday would say, the obstacle is the way. You turn into that challenge, that obstacle, and that is where your strength is really developed and built. And that's where that resilience comes from. And that's how you end up getting to the other side, to a place where, man, you can take on anything.
Yeah, I would believe, I've been told, so it's not me tooting my own horn, of all the qualities that I possess, I would say that this is my number one quality. Because if you really put down on paper, you say, man, you should have gave up a couple of times. And you just said you lost money in business, drug addiction, alcoholism. But when, like Steven said, when you realize that through the resiliency that you've obtained or the shitty things that you've gone through, then you can turn around and help other people through their problems. That's when it all turned around for me. That's when I realized, okay, there's a lesson here. You can help people this. And I'm not saying it's the right thing, so please don't quote me on this. But 2 days into when I knew I was going to get divorced, the first thing in my mind said, I'm going to be able to help out so many couples with this experience right here. And that's when someplace in my heart and head, that moment, that shame, that hurt, that crying myself to sleep for 10 nights in a row, something changed inside of me and knew that it was a gift that the world was giving me. I just had to see it as that gift.
But let me say that, tapping into that, I think you're so right. Like tapping into purpose, of being able to have a purpose for going through that challenge and sharing that with others, super strong. But is that developing resilience, or is that developing a purpose to get you through that tough piece?
I don't know. That's a good point. I don't have an answer right now. I have to think on that. Maybe a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it's just a different perspective or outlook on the situation.
I want to repeat something that Steven said a minute ago that I thought was really, really good and worth repeating and really thinking about, which is that resilience is not developed, it's discovered. I think that's a really profound concept. And, we go on a lot of podcasts, us three. And one of the questions a lot of people like to ask is something to the effect of like, what's a life well lived, or like, what's your purpose, or like, what's your big goal in life? And we get the opportunity to reflect on that. And one of the things that I often think about is the idea of chasing my capacity. And I think Ed Mylett talks about this, and he has a great way of expressing it in ways that only Ed Mylett can, but it's effectively like he imagines is like perfect, most badass, greatest self welcoming him at the pearly gates someday and saying like, dude, I've been watching you, I'm proud of you. And his greatest fear is like meeting that guy and not recognizing him. Right. And the idea that we don't know where our boundary is unless we go seeking it, or it just is thrust upon us, as life sometimes does, right? Like Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. He talks about this. And Steven, I hadn't heard that story about the outward bound, but it ties into Viktor Frankl's effective, like what he experienced in Auschwitz was the people who didn't make it were the ones that had too much optimism, and they had the other side of it was they had no optimism. It was the people who could maintain optimism in the face of reality and not get too driven by hope and too driven by pessimism. They were the ones that are able to endure. And so I'm wrestling with a lot of concepts here, but one of the ones I want to explore now is like this idea of boundaries and what we can do short of life happening to us. Like when Kat passed away, I'm sure that was like an experience of life thrusting upon you, saying like, you're about to discover what you can do, right? And life is going to hand that to you sometimes. But short of those experiences, what can we do in our day-to-day life, do you think, to explore and probe the outer limits of our boundaries?
Yeah, well, I think it's phenomenal to explore them. It's also phenomenal to have boundaries, in your life, to be able to know what is a standard that you accept for yourself, but also what's a standard that you accept for others, the people that you want in your life. How will you be treated? How will you treat others? What will you accept from those close to you? And having those boundaries is really important. They creates that security, and it creates a level of respect. So it's really important to have that and to develop those. When you're going to explore what those outer boundaries are, I think that it can be really easy for high achievers to thrust yourself way outside of your boundaries. And that can be dangerous, because you can have massive amounts of growth, but you can also put yourself in a position where you're so far away from your tether that you don't feel that level of security to keep yourself in a good state during that experience. And sometimes us high achievers will do that. We'll push ourselves way beyond anything that we've ever experienced, and we'll grow through it, but we'll make it traumatic. It'll be a very stressful experience, versus being able to make movement that is closer to where it is that we are. Now, I'm not against doing that. I've definitely done that. I'm definitely an all-in kind of guy. I definitely have made some of those choices, but I've also seen where those choices, going all in or pushing, towards a relationship or a friendship or a business partnership or some business, where pushing in too fast ends up leading to massive loss, versus, not stepping so far outside of your comfort zone. So I think it's all about having that balance of knowing, okay, I'm going to step 10 steps out, but I know I feel comfortable stepping 8 steps back in. So I'm still really close. I can still make that move, and you're slowly growing that ability. And life's going to happen itself, and it's going to throw you for a loop, and you're going to be pushed way outside of it anyways. But then you at least have that level of security to be able to deal with that uncertainty that is going to happen, because it's going to happen in life. That's just kind of like part of it.
I mean, aren't we talking about here emotional stability? I mean, isn't that what because this is, I have a theme word for every year. I carry this one over for 2 years in a row, because I understood that as a CEO and getting into further business partnerships, I have to, what Steven just described there, like jumping into partnerships too quick and that's me. You might as well just said Austin Linney at the end of that conversation. It has got me places, but I've also lost money from it. And so it's like this emotional, neutral thinking kind of, yes, you can take action, which creates momentum and makes you grow, but also not being so far down the tunnel that you can't see what's going on. I think you, of all people, Anthony, I think are amazing at this, to really take a beat, take a breath, and really look at it from a 30,000 point view and go, why am I doing this? I think that's the better question. Like, what's the actual genesis behind what I want to get out of it and why I'm doing it? But I also wouldn't take back the action that I've taken. But as I get older, I can see where maybe it could have been more on firmer ground.
Emotional stability. That's an interesting concept. And it's what makes you and I interesting pair, Austin, is that we come from such different ends of the spectrum, right? I'm a little bit dead inside and you're a little bit too alive. so we meet in the middle, right? Yeah. So,
but in the sense, I think I'm going to let you finish your topic.
No, I got anything.
No, but I think that through this process, now this, 40 episodes, I think that we've met in the middle, our personalities and a little bit of our habits. Have you noticed that as well too? Like, I see you more open than ever before, and I see me a little calmer and more thought out than I probably have in the past.
That's a big development for you, Austin.
Yeah. For me, I think emotional stability, I've never really had an issue with emotional stability as much as I have about emotional expression. Right? Like, I'm very emotionally stable, but feeling comfortable expressing emotion. That's where I get tripped up. And those aren't necessarily tied into, I think, the same thing. One is maybe more of a fear and ego holding back, or just a real discomfort with emotions in general, or displaying them. So I think that's one of the areas that you and I are very different, Austin. You are very comfortable displaying big emotions, and I do not. I feel big emotions, but I do not display them.
It was the only way that I was going to get sober. I almost had to be so forward with it that I showed myself that it didn't own me anymore. And the only way to do that was just to lay it out there. And then when I laid it out there and it affected people and they said, give me more, I kind of just leaned into it even farther. And that's why it's almost a joke when I meet people, hey, divorced, alcoholic, drug addict, nice to meet you. Like, that's kind of my thing now, And so, Steven, I find you to be on the spectrum of, like, I think you're very tapped into your emotions, and I think that they move you. But I also, and I mentioned this when I had you on the podcast the first time on mine, but you're also very cognizant about the environment that you're in and who needs to see them and not. And that's, once again, that boundary conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I've found that by moderating what I present to the world, it helps end up leading to a better outcome. Now, sometimes that ends up leading to a shield. It's a block, right? It's a preventing from other people seeing what's being experienced or felt. And I think it's a beautiful thing to develop, though, because, in some circumstances, laying it all out there on the table is not what the situation needs. But at other times, it is really important to be able to open up and to be able to share those hard truths or those feelings, the quote, authenticity conversation, the quote, telling more personal stories and opening up those things. But it's a balancing act, and it's not always clear what's going to end up working out the right way. I think that skill set is really well developed when you have to put yourself in many different environments. I moved, every 2 or 3 or 4 years growing up. So new elementary school, middle school, high school. And I probably kept that same habit going on, even into adulthood. Denver's just been the place I've been the longest because I keep coming back. But that ability to then go and be a chameleon was a really great skill. But it actually, I had to, I think in the last number of years, really be able to develop that true understanding of who I am, having that tapped in understanding of who is Steven, what is self, what is important, and having that ability to know yourself is probably, it's one of my superpowers, but it's one of the things I think everybody should really focus on developing, because when you really know yourself, when you really know your flaws, when you've got that self-awareness, when you know all of your strengths, and you don't look at all the flaws as a negative, like you just know where you're strong or you're maybe not as strong. I think that can be what I found is that it ends up leading to some of the best conversations. When I meet other people who have that self-awareness, you can end up having a level of connection that's really deep, and you can really make some cool things happen.
Yeah, I preach this constantly, and I will go to my deathbed on this, is that self-awareness is the superpower. If you take nothing away else from this podcast episode, is we're talking about beliefs and mindsets, adaptability, resilience, and like all of these things, they stem first and foremost from having the self-awareness of understanding where you are and why you're showing up in the ways that you currently are. And the analogy that we use around these parts is, we can show up in all our different relationships in different vehicles. We can sometimes show up in the Lamborghini. Sometimes we show up in the Toyota Prius. Sometimes we show up on a scooter, right? At the end of it, though, the driver is always the same. The person behind the wheel, that's you. And you might choose to show up in these different vehicles depending on the circumstances. The important thing to understand, though, is why you chose those vehicles. Like, why do I feel the need to show up in this vehicle, in this conversation? When you start to understand your underlying motivation as an individual, you start to understand then why you're suffering or why you're succeeding. And that's the thing that I've noticed from the successful people in my life is like, they are very aware of why they're suffering and why they're succeeding. They know it. they might not have the answer to how to stop it yet, but they're aware of it. And and to solve, to overcome the issue is to first understand what's causing the issue. And then something else I wanted to tie, because this actually came up at the conference that Steven and I were at last week. Sterling was on the stage and somebody asked him, he was talking about marketing and branding, and somebody asked him, like, when is it oversharing? And, Steven's point about, like, sometimes is not the right, like, it's not always the right time to lay everything on the table. And something that is in my head that I've heard before that I thought is really good is that you share the scars, not the open wounds, right? Like, and be careful about sharing the open wounds, because the open wound hasn't been healed yet. You maybe haven't fixed it. You haven't unpacked it well enough to be able to share it openly, but you should share the scars.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, or even a year ago, I probably wouldn't have talked about my sister on a podcast. I haven't talked about it on my own show. But at this point, now that it may still be a wound, but it's very much healed. And that enables me to be able to share with other people comfortably what that experience was like. And by being able to share that, I think it really ends up, that is that level of authenticity and that connection that can happen where maybe somebody else has gone through it. Maybe they've had a sudden loss. Maybe they've had one that wasn't so sudden, but maybe they had something that happened in their life that was really tough medically, they can connect with. And being able to share some of those things at the right time, the right situation is really powerful. Where it can be a detriment is it's oftentimes, I've been here, I think a lot of people have been here, where we share things using vulnerability as a tool for acceptance or for being liked or welcomed in. And what's risky about that is when we share it with the intent of being accepted or validated or anything like that, with the intent of the connection, if it is not received in the way that we desire, or it is not appreciated in the way we desire, then it is very dangerous, because then we're actually using it to manipulate the other person to be loved, to be connected to. And so it's important that we check ourselves. When are we doing that? Because I've definitely seen myself do that in romantic relationships and friendships, where you share something and you're like, oh, I should not have shared that. I've stepped over my vulnerability line. I do not actually feel comfortable here. And I'm sharing it with the wrong intent. And so we can catch ourselves doing that. We can at least understand, well, why were we doing that in the first place? Why was it so important for us to try to feel comfortable in that space, and to be able to step back from it, maybe even acknowledge it. Hey, I feel like I overshared. I just want to acknowledge that, it doesn't feel right. And, hopefully, there's no hard feelings or whatever, because I think other people can sense it. And so when we can have that self-awareness to know that, we can kind of self-regulate in a more effective way.
It's the most, I was talking about this with somebody yesterday in my coaching group that we're getting certification. It's the nastiest side of manipulation, because you know exactly why you're doing it. And Anthony taught me this at a conference he was at, selective vulnerability as well. Sharing my bad so you can make me feel good over here. And it's something that we talked about at length with this podcast. And it's, and to your point earlier, Steven, we've known each other, we talk. And that's the first time I've heard about your sister. I mean, I knew of it, but that's the first time I heard about it. And now, just to show you, I'm more impressed, more connected with you and what you've been able to accomplish, switching businesses and traveling and doing all this while you're grieving, says to me more about you than I knew beforehand. Right. And so, it's super powerful to me to, I almost feel like the relationship is taken to another level. And that's where it's at its positive core, and having that moment. And thank you for sharing that story with us, because it'll stick with me for quite a while.
Absolutely.
Anthony?
I got nothing. Yeah, I'm unpacking in my mind. In my mind, that's the only place I can unpack. I have it. It was funny. I had it written here: vulnerability to be accepted, and then I had written the word manipulation just a second before Steven said it, because it's that's where my mind goes to. And I would say the majority of my experiences growing up with people being vulnerable was in an attempt to emotionally connect with me in a way that would make me dependent on them, or connect us in a way that I wasn't comfortable with. And so I know from my personal experience, specifically with my mom, which I've talked about a little bit here, where it's always the people closest to us, typically, right? Like, because we're so afraid of losing the ones closest to us, and we sometimes sense people growing apart, and they're growing into different people, and we're not who we were yesterday, and we're not who we were 10 years ago, and that can be very scary. And so the fear is, how can I hold you where you are? And so, that's a lot of stuff that I have to personally unpack, and I think a lot of people do as well. Like men, probably in particular. This is, I think, generally the big concern that they have with vulnerability is that they feel manipulated, or that there's some manipulation involved in it. And so that's where my mind goes to. And I don't know, like, I'm not a female, so I can't speak to the other side of the equation. Unfortunately, I can just say from my side, I've seen it play out. And that's why for me, I've always struggled to be vulnerable, and not to do it in a selectively vulnerable way where you just present the weakness as a feigned weakness, a straw man, so that you can then set up and say, well, look at this great thing that I overcame. Because that's the other side of the equation, right?
I think that is really powerful to acknowledge, and an opportunity for you is to dive into something called shadow work, Jung psychology. This is the idea of the shadow. It's this part of you that is the part that hides, the part that is behind all the greatness, right? It's the part that is that fear that's going along with it. And when you can start to understand your shadow, and you can start to understand that part of you, you can start to really unleash all of you. You can really start to unleash all of who you are and connect on an even deeper level, and really have sovereign leadership over yourself as a man. And I think one of the great places to do that is in men's work, in men's groups. This is something I've recently kind of become a part of. There's, obviously different groups online or in person. And these are usually, coaching groups, maybe 5-10 people. They're getting together. They're usually led by, a professional coach or a psychologist, somebody who's coming in, and they're going to guide people through this experience of understanding some of these things, but also, most importantly, acknowledging it together in a group setting, where there's a heavy level of trust. We're sharing some of those vulnerabilities, and we're starting to unpack, well, what is it that we've been hiding from ourselves? What is it, that we have been trying to present to the world? Where does this stuff come from? And to be able to do that in a group setting, where you end up realizing that many other men all experience this, I think it's really important. And the reason I want to kind of champion it, because I think that in today's day and age, what we're seeing is females have had a great opportunity to have a lot of support for the last 20, 30, 40 years of really building up, great relationships with one another, really championing the culture of caring for one another and being there for one another. But that's not really something that is prevalent within male society. But what's happening is many less men are going to university. Many less men are graduating with the degrees that end up leading to high-paying careers. And this is something that is being experienced throughout our society. There's a challenge. And so I think as leaders ourselves, when we can bring ourselves into community with other people, share in these kind of environments, whether that be in person or online, or even in your own one-to-one work with a coach or a mentor or a therapist. I think that stuff is super powerful, because it allows us to be more of who we are meant to be. It allows us to stop hiding those parts of ourselves because of the trauma we experience, because our parents did whatever they did, right? They had the tools they had, but they fucked it up, as all parents have and will. But being able to understand that, and then essentially recreate new thought patterns and beliefs. I've seen just some amazing work within the group that I've been a part of.
wherever the resistance is, that's where you need to be looking. It's simple as that. Wherever you're avoiding, whatever you're drinking against, turning on Netflix against, walking away from, lean into that. I promise you come out the other side better for it. So, Steven, if people want to find out about the podcast, they want to see what you got going on, how would they do that?
Yeah, head over to investormindset.com or search Investor Mindset Show on your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, listen along, or shoot on over to Instagram at Steven.Pesavento. Would love to connect with you there. Drop me a DM. Let me know you're a listener, and happy to serve.
Anthony, homework?
I want to give Steven the homework. I think I bet he could come up with some awesome homework, but I want to
see you're throwing more stuff on him, dude.
Yeah. Well, I do want to encourage everybody to go listen to Steven's podcast, The Investor Mindset. It's fantastic. It's great. Diving into so many of the concepts that we unpack here on the show. So if you can't get enough of us, well, go get some Steven.
Here's my homework for the audience. My homework is you've listened to 45, 50 minutes of audio. There's been a lot of conversation here. There's been a lot of ideas. I guarantee you there's something that made an impact on you that you listened to and you thought to yourself, you know what, I really want to start taking some action on that, or I wish that was a part of my life. I encourage you to select one of those things. There's probably 20, but select one of them and commit to it right now. Pull over the car, schedule it in your phone, shoot yourself an email, and tell somebody you're going to do it. And commit to taking that action on it so that you can take the fact that you listen to something and make it and actually impact your life.
Love it. Thank you so much, Steven. Guys, share this episode, send it to a friend that'll get some value, rate us and review us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Construct Your Life with Austin Linney. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and pay it forward by sharing with a friend. Most importantly, take this opportunity to start constructing your life by taking immediate action on what you learned. For show notes, resources, and more information on one-on-one coaching with Austin, visit constructyourlifepodcast.com.